My dear brothers and sisters across Africa, and to all of you watching from around the world, I greet you with respect, and I wish you strength, peace, and good health today. Tonight, I want you to imagine something. A quiet morning, somewhere in Africa. No headlines, no breaking news alerts. Just ordinary people, waking up, going to work, trying to provide for their families. And yet, behind the scenes, something is shifting, something powerful, something quiet, but dangerous. Because in less than 90 days, a deadline is approaching. One that could impact over 300 million lives across East Africa. 300 million. That's not just a number. That's fathers, mothers, grandparents, people like you. People who have waited their entire lives for something to finally change. But here is the question that we must face honestly tonight. What if this moment is not just about opportunity? What if it is a test? A test of whether Africa is finally ready to stand on its own feet. From the oil fields of Nigeria to the decision rooms of East Africa, to the quiet but firm voice of Ibrahim Traoré, a new idea is spreading. An idea that says, we will no longer wait. We will no longer ask. We will build with our own hands. But history has taught us something painful. Every time Africa moves forward, something pushes back. So tonight, we are not just telling a story. We are asking a serious question. Will this be the moment Africa rises? Or the moment everything is tested once again? Before we go deeper, I want you to take a quiet second and tell me, where are you watching from? Because this story is not just Africa's story anymore. Now, to understand what is really happening, we need to start with a number that has been draining Africa for over 60 years, and most people have never truly understood it. Now, let's begin with a number. $10 billion. Every single year, $10 billion was leaving Africa's largest oil producer. Not because the oil was gone, not because the people lacked skill, but because of a system. A system so deeply embedded that many stopped questioning it. Nigeria, a nation blessed with vast oil reserves, spent over 60 years exporting crude oil, only to buy it back as refined fuel. Think about that for a moment. The oil is drilled from African soil, loaded onto foreign tankers, shipped across oceans, refined in distant lands, and then sold back at a higher price to the very people it came from. That is not just inefficiency. That is dependency. And for men like Musa, a 52-year-old father living on the edge of Lagos, this system was not theory. It was daily life. Every morning, Musa would wake before sunrise, prepare for work, and step into a reality he could not control. Transportation costs rising without warning, food prices shifting with global markets he had never seen. Fuel, something his country had in abundance, always just a little too expensive. Not because Nigeria lacked oil, but because Nigeria did not control the system around it. For decades, this became normal. Until early 2026, when something changed quietly, but decisively. Nigeria made a move that many believed would never happen. They said, no. No more new fuel import licenses. No more automatic dependence on foreign refineries. Because for the first time, an African-built industrial giant had reached full capacity. The Dangote Refinery, a project once dismissed as impossible, now producing over 90% of Nigeria's domestic fuel needs. Let that sink in. For the first time in modern history, Africa's most populous nation could fuel itself. For Musa, and millions like him, this was more than economics. It was dignity. It was the feeling, perhaps for the first time, that the system might finally be changing. But history has a way of testing moments like this. Because just weeks after this bold decision, something unexpected happened. The government quietly reopened the door. 6 new import licenses were approved. And across the country, confusion began to spread. Why step back just as independence was within reach? The answer did not come from Nigeria. It came from far beyond its borders. War. When the United States launched strikes in the Middle East, global oil markets reacted instantly. Prices surged past $100 per barrel. And suddenly, Nigeria's fragile balance was under pressure. Because even with a powerful refinery, the system was not fully under control. Not yet. The refinery depended on crude supply agreements, global pricing, and financial structures still connected to the wider world. And when that world shifted, so did everything. Inside Nigeria, a deeper debate began to take shape. Some voices argued, protect the refinery at all costs. Give it time to grow, to stabilize, to compete. Because no nation builds strength by exposing its youngest industries to global giants too soon. Others warned, be careful. Because replacing foreign dependence with a local monopoly is not true freedom. If one entity controls supply, pricing, and access, then the system may look different, but feel the same. And so, the question became more complex than anyone expected. This was no longer just about fuel. It was about power. Who controls the resources? Who sets the prices? And ultimately, who shapes the future? Across the continent, leaders were watching. Because Nigeria's experiment was not just national, it was symbolic. If it succeeded, it would prove something powerful. That African-scale industry, built with African capital, could stand on its own. But if it failed, it would reinforce the old narrative that Africa must always depend. And this is where the story becomes even bigger than Nigeria. Because while this battle over energy was unfolding, another, quieter shift was taking place. Not in oil fields, not in refineries, but across borders, across an entire region preparing for a single moment in time, a deadline that could change everything. Because what 8 African presidents agreed to next could unlock opportunities for 300 million people overnight, or expose just how deep the resistance to change really goes. Now, this is where the story changes, because what looked like a simple economic adjustment was actually something much deeper, a test, not just for Nigeria, but for the entire idea of African independence. You see, when fuel prices surged globally and Nigeria reopened import licenses, it sent a signal across the continent, a signal that said, freedom is not a single decision. It is a system, and systems are much harder to change. Inside Nigeria, people like Musa began to feel that uncertainty again. For a brief moment, hope had risen. The idea that maybe, just maybe, the country would finally control its own destiny. But now, questions returned. At the petrol stations, conversations changed. Will prices go down or rise again? Who is really in control? And perhaps the most important question of all, is this change real or temporary? But Nigeria was not alone in this moment. Across Africa, leaders, economists, and ordinary citizens were watching closely. Because what Nigeria was experiencing was something every African nation understands: the tension between sovereignty and survival. And then, something even more powerful began to emerge. A realization that no single country, no matter how strong, can fully break free alone. And that is when attention quietly shifted east to a meeting that most of the world ignored. No dramatic headlines, no global media coverage, just 8 African presidents sitting in a room, making a decision that could change everything. They set a deadline, June 30th, 2026. And what they proposed was nothing short of revolutionary. The complete removal of internal trade barriers across East Africa. Now, on paper, that might sound technical, But let me think about a fifth. She spent decades building a small bakery, waking up at 4 a.m. every morning, kneading dough, saving every dollar she could, not for luxury, but for stability, for her children, for her future. One day, she saw an opportunity, a chance to expand her business beyond Kenya, into neighboring Rwanda. The demand was there, the market was ready, and under the law, there were no tariffs, no official barriers. So she loaded her truck with fresh bread, full of hope, and sent it across the border. But when that truck arrived, everything changed. An official looked at her documents and said something was missing. Another questioned her packaging. A third suggested there were procedures that needed to be followed. Days passed. The bread sat in the heat, spoiling, rotting. By the time clearance came, it was too late. Margaret lost the shipment. She lost the contract. And more importantly, she lost the belief that expansion was possible. Now understand this clearly. No law stopped her. No official rule denied her. But the system did. Invisible barriers, delays, confusion, discretion. This is how opportunity has been quietly destroyed across Africa for decades. Not through open restriction, but through silent obstruction. And this is exactly what the June 30th deadline is trying to eliminate. 17 checkpoints between cities. Paperwork that changes without warning. Processes designed not for efficiency, but for control. If those barriers disappear, everything changes. Goods move faster, prices drop, businesses expand, and millions of jobs could be created almost overnight. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Those barriers, because they benefit someone. The official who delays paperwork, the middleman who profits from inefficiency, the system that feeds on friction. And removing them means taking power away from those who depend on them. So now, the real tension begins. Because this is no longer about policy. It is about courage. Do leaders truly have the will to dismantle a system that benefits the very people enforcing it? Or will the deadline come and quietly pass, like so many promises before it? Across the continent, people are watching, waiting, hoping, but also remembering history. Because Africa has seen bold declarations before. It has heard powerful speeches. It has signed agreements that never became reality. And this time, the stakes are higher than ever. Because while Africa is preparing to unite from within, something unexpected is happening outside its borders. Something that could either strengthen this movement or completely derail it. Now, let's slow down for a moment. Because everything we've talked about so far, oil, trade, systems, it all leads to one simple question. What does this actually mean for ordinary people? Not governments, not corporations, but families. People like Musa and Margaret. People who don't sit in policy meetings, but live with the consequences of every decision made there. Because when systems fail, it is never the powerful who feel it first. It is the family. It is the father who can no longer afford transport to work. The grandmother who watches her small business collapse. The young man who begins to lose hope. And hope, when it disappears, creates something far more dangerous than poverty. It creates instability. Across parts of Africa, we are already seeing the pressure build. In rural communities, where trade routes are blocked or unreliable, prices rise faster than incomes. Farmers struggle to move their goods. Markets shrink. And slowly, quietly, people begin to leave. Families separate. Young men migrate toward cities or across borders, searching for opportunity that should have existed at home. But when opportunity does not come, something else does. We have seen this pattern before. In regions where systems fail, other forces step in. Armed groups, smuggling networks, shadow economies. Because where the state cannot provide structure, someone else will. And this is where the stakes become clear. This is not just about economics anymore. It is about security. Because every blocked road, every failed business, every lost opportunity creates space that can be filled by instability. And in countries like Burkina Faso, that pressure is already visible. Communities living under constant uncertainty, villages adjusting to the reality that safety is no longer guaranteed. And yet, at the same time, something different is happening. A shift. Under leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, the response is not just defensive, it is structural. Instead of waiting for external support, the focus is turning inward, building roads, connecting regions, creating internal systems that reduce dependence on outside forces. Because here is a truth that many have begun to understand. You cannot secure a nation if you cannot sustain it. And you cannot sustain it if your economy depends on systems you do not control. This is why infrastructure, trade integration, and energy independence are no longer separate conversations. They are one. They are the foundation of stability. But building that foundation takes time. And time is something many communities feel they no longer have. Because while leaders plan for the future, people are living in the present. And the present can be unforgiving. A delayed reform means another business lost. A blocked trade route means another family struggling. A missed opportunity means another young person questioning whether to stay or leave. And this is where the emotional weight of this moment truly sits. Not in conference rooms, but in homes, in quiet conversations between parents and children, in decisions about whether to invest or to give up. And yet, despite all of this, there is still something holding strong, a sense of expectation that this time might be different. Because for the first time in decades, the conversation is not just about aid, it is about control. Control of resources, control of borders, control of destiny. But here is the reality we cannot ignore. Change at this scale creates resistance, not just internally, but externally. Because systems that have benefited for decades do not simply step aside. They adapt. They apply pressure, sometimes quietly, sometimes openly. And that brings us to the final piece of this story. Because while Africa is trying to rebuild from within, the world outside is beginning to shift in ways no one can ignore. And what just happened between the United States and its closest allies may have opened a window of opportunity Africa has not seen in over 60 years, but also a risk no one is fully prepared for. Now, let's step outside Africa for just a moment, because what is happening globally is just as important as what is happening inside the continent. In early 2026, something unusual happened. The United States, long seen as the central force of global order, launched major strikes in the Middle East. For decades, moments like this followed a familiar pattern. America moves, and its allies follow. Bases open, airspace clears, support aligns. That was the system. But this time, something different happened. Italy said no. Spain went even further, closing its airspace entirely. And the United Kingdom, a country that has stood beside the United States for generations, made a statement that echoed around the world. This is not our war. Now, for many watching casually, this may seem like politics, disagreement, debate, nothing new. But for those who understand history, this is something much deeper. Because when alliances begin to fracture, power begins to shift. And when power shifts, opportunities appear. For decades, African nations have negotiated from a position of weakness, limited options, limited leverage, often forced to accept terms rather than shape them. But now, something is changing. Because for the first time in a long time, the global system itself is uncertain. And leaders like Ibrahim Traoré understand what that means. It means space. Space to negotiate differently. Space to choose new partners. Space to say no. But here is the part that matters most, especially for those of you watching from the United States. Because when global stability weakens, it does not stay contained. Energy prices rise. Supply chains shift. Security risks expand. What happens in Africa does not stay in Africa. It connects economically, strategically, and increasingly politically. Because a stronger, more independent Africa is not just a regional story. It becomes a global factor, a partner, or potentially a competitor. And that is why this moment matters. Not just for Africa, but for the world. Because the question now is no longer whether change is happening, but whether Africa is ready to use this moment before the window closes again. Now, we arrive at the moment that matters most. Not in a government office, not in a refinery, not at a border checkpoint, but right here, in the question we all must answer. What kind of future is being built? Because everything we've seen, Nigeria's bold move, East Africa's deadline, the fractures in global alliances, they are not isolated events. They are signals, signals that something long established is beginning to change. But change does not guarantee success. It only creates possibility. And possibility comes with risk. Because history has shown us something very clearly. Every time Africa moves toward independence, pressure follows. Sometimes economic, sometimes political, and sometimes something much harder to see. Influence, disruption, delays that seem small, but slowly shift the outcome. That is why this moment is different. Not because the opportunity is new, but because the awareness is. For the first time in generations, more people are asking the right questions. Who controls the system? Who benefits from the delays? And who decides whether progress continues or stops? Leaders like Ibrahim Traoré have become symbols of a different approach. Not waiting, not asking, but acting. And whether one agrees with every decision or not, the message is undeniable. Africa is beginning to think differently, to act differently, to see itself not as a participant in someone else's system, but as a builder of its own. Now here is the question I want to leave with you tonight. When June 30th arrives, will we look back at this moment as the beginning of something real, or just another deadline that passed quietly into history? Because the truth is, the future will not be decided by speeches. It will be by whether ordinary people feel the difference in their daily lives. So as you sit with this, I invite you to reflect for a moment, not loudly, not publicly, just honestly. Where are you watching from? And what kind of world do you believe is coming next? Because whether we realize it or not, we are not just watching history unfold. We are living inside it. CTA. Mem. Kamsup. And if this message stayed with you, stay close, because the next chapter may arrive sooner than any of us expect.